I'd like to introduce Moore's academic dean, Patty Phillips, to welcome us to the event.
So hello, everyone. Daniel, thank you very much. And just a reminder that this is being recorded. I truly have been looking forward to this evening for a while. An artist presentation followed by what I expect and imagine will be a very spirited conversation between two very accomplished and deeply committed cultural engagers and leaders, observers, and critics. But first, I want to just take a moment and I want to acknowledge and thank my wonderful Moore colleague, Daniel Tucker, who has been organizing the conversation series here at Moore, guiding and curating the development of these important and responsive forums for the past at least 7 years. I came to Moore in the summer of 2016, and he had long been at work on these projects. So I've just enjoyed the last 5 years of this, which has been wonderful. So Daniel, thank you for being such a great steward and for your independent intelligence as an academic and also cultural leader. And it's always really gratifying to welcome the MFA and MA students in socially engaged art program here at Moore. And of course, all of you and all of us who are here this evening. It's really good to be in community with all of you. I want to just say a few brief things about our guests this evening. Let me start with Alicia Grullón, who is an artist who lives in the Bronx, and I'm going to say this now because I might forget it later, but she has a show, an exhibition right now called Please Don't Let It Be Too Close. It's on view at Spaces, January 22nd to March 19th. She lives, as I said, she lives in the Bronx. She did a Hemispheric Institute fellowship at NYU and directs her interdisciplinary practice towards critiques of the politics of presence, arguing for the inclusion of disenfranchised communities in political and social spaces. She's the co-organizer and co-author of the People's Cultural Plan, a coalition of artists, cultural workers, and activists responding to New York City's first ever cultural plan in 2017. She's had many exhibitions, the Bronx Museum of Art, Columbia University's Wallach Art Gallery, BRIC Arts, the Spring Break Art Show, Performa 11, and as I said, many other sites and venues. She's also a contributing author to Rhetoric, Social Value and the Arts, But How Does It Work?, edited by Nicola Mann and Charlotte Bronham Carter, and Bridging Communities Through Socially Engaged Art, edited by Alice Wexler and Vita Sabaga. That's a Routledge, New York book. Recent activities include the Shandaken Project, which is a residency at Governor's Island, and the Bronx Museum of the Arts AIM alumni program. She is currently an adjunct professor at Queens College in their socially engaged practice program. And I'm really delighted to say that she's also an adjunct professor here at Moore College of Art and Design in the spring in the graduate programs that Daniel Tucker leads. Importantly, Alicia is the Jane and David Walentas Endowed Fellow at Moore College of Art and Design. It is a 2-year appointment, started in 2020. She'll be engaged in this fellowship until 2022. The late Jane Walentas was a graduate of Moore College of Art and Design. And with her husband, David, they became incredibly generous cultural philanthropists. And it was very important to Jane to create this fellowship and also keep it very, very open and kind of undetermined, and really allow the fellow to customize it and to animate it in ways that feels purposeful and meaningful. And we're so delighted, Alicia, that you're in this role. It's of course been a very unusual first year of the fellowship, but we're very happy to have you and look forward to further conversations and levels of engagement with you. Laura Raicovich is dedicated to art and artistic production that relies on complexity, poetics, and care to create a more engaged and equitable civic realm. During the pandemic, and she has recently stepped down from this position, she served as the interim director of the Leslie Lohman Museum of Art. And she is finishing a book that's actually going to be published in June by Verso, and the book is titled Cultural Strike, Art and Museums in an Age of Protest. She also was the recipient of the inaugural Emily H. Tremaine Journalism Fellowship for Curators at Hyperallergic. She just wrapped that up. She also had served until 2018 as the president and executive director of the Queen's Museum. And she also curated one of the most remarkable shows I think I've ever seen, Melchin All Over the Place. It encompassed the entire museum, as well as many other public and outdoor sites. It was a really, really remarkable undertaking. And while she was director, she also brought oversight and enthusiasm to many other exhibitions, including Meryl Laderman Ukule's Maintenance Art, a project that I had the honor of working on with Laura and others at the Queen's Museum. Prior to being at the Queen's Museum, she was very engaged with Creative Time and developed a number of initiatives, the Global Initiative, as well as Creative Time Reports, and helped to direct the Creative Time Summit, all important written and actual forums. She, before that, was at the Dia Art Foundation at a very critical time of growth in that organization, and that included the opening of Dia Beacon, which of course has become, kind of an infamous destination for so many people. She has written about the Walter de Maria's Lightning Field and Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty in that capacity. She also has organized events with the Vera List Center for Arts and Politics, including the Freedom of Speech, a curriculum for studies into darkness. And she has been involved in the project Assuming Boycott, Resistance, Agency, and Cultural Production for Orr Books 2017, and is also the author of At the Lightning Field and A Diary of Mysterious Difficulties, Publication Studio 2014. I could go on, but I will not, because we want to hear them talk. But I hope that the next hour, the conversation will incite you to want to learn more and to follow the work of these remarkable individuals, to understand the purpose of their work, the clarity of their work. They really are kind of remarkable divining rods of contemporary art, culture, and public life. So I'll turn this over to Laura to get us started.
Thanks so much, Patty, and Daniel and Chuck for making all of this possible. Thank you for having us. I guess I just want to begin with two kind of important aspects of, for me, any public event. And one of those things is to acknowledge that I'm speaking to you now from the traditional Lenape lands that is today known as Manhattan, and to acknowledge the stewardship of those lands by Indigenous people in the past, in the present, and into the future. And also to provide an access check. If there's anything that you need during the course of this talk, please feel free to ping Daniel in the Q&A. That will be the forum for communicating with the organizers, and also to put your questions in there whenever they come up. You don't have to wait till the end. You can just stick them in there and as we go. And then finally, I just want to describe myself for access purposes. I am a 48-year-old white woman. I have shoulder-length brown hair with blonde stripes in it, and I am wearing glasses and red lipstick, and I have a shirt on that only has one sleeve. So I'm just going to before I hand it over to Alicia, I'm just going to give you an outline of what we're going to do. Alicia is going to give you an overview of some of the work that she's been doing during this last year. I think just given the events of the last year and also her fellowship with MORE, the Walentas Fellowship, I think we thought this was an appropriate way to kind of frame the talk. But of course, we can go anywhere. So I encourage you to drop in questions anytime you like. So she's going to present some work for the next 15 minutes or so, and then we'll talk, and then we'll open it up. Thank you so much all for joining us, and Alicia, take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming. It's nice to see some familiar names as well in the chat and the audience. And I wish that we were in person somehow. But I guess this is the way that we're meant to be. And this is the way that we actually get to be together. I will tell you I'm speaking from the Muncie, Lenape, and Wappinger land, now currently known as the Bronx. I'm in my home. I am a 47-year-old Latinx brown woman. I have straight black hair, and I am wearing a sweater with red and black designs on it. And I have headphones on my head, and the background behind me is a white wall. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen and telling you a little bit about my practice overall. But I will focus on images and work that I created during the last year, during 2020, at the start of the pandemic. Work that's currently up at Spaces at Cleveland, Ohio, and other work that's appeared on IGTV, because that's been a platform that many of us have been able to share our artwork, and that smaller institutions and larger ones as well have also used, particularly in 2020, to keep us all connected. So I'm about to share my screen, so bear with me. Okay, you're gonna see my desktop. It's pretty clean. It's all gray. I keep it gray so that when I'm editing video, it doesn't take up so much, so much RAM space when things are rendering. Just a fun fact, useful tip. So I put my body in situations that have historically not been meant for me or designed, so I have little control over how I'm represented in them. By which I mean my body as a signifier. How do I read as I walk into a room when the signification of my body will vary based on who's doing the looking within the context of the settler colonial plantation gaze? These situations have included academic institutions, the Revolutionary War, government policy, environmentalism, feminism, and the United Nations. I encourage viewers to reflect upon my work as a storytelling process, bordering between the staged and the documented. I use performance art, social engaged art, photography, and video towards the critiques on the politics of presence, arguing for the inclusion of divested communities in political and social spheres. And in my work, I visually analyze the semiotic conditions creating inequality. Photography was a colonial tool, driving narratives, dehumanizing the colonized. So I'm interested in the visual patterns used throughout the 19th and 20th centuries and examine the structure of image making, how people have been visually othered, and how through embodied research, I can undo that. Right now on the screen, there are 3 images that are a part of my self-portrait series from March to June at home with essential workers. And it kind of debuted midway of completion, because it's not going to be completed until like next month, of these portraits of essential workers that I started taking in my home. And they debuted at the Bronx Museum of the Arts and what turned out to be a solo exhibition, but online. And you're still able to see it if you click through it. And these are some of the images, particularly the one on the outer sides that are on view at Spaces. And I'll talk to you all a little bit more about them. But I'm going to read a little bit. I was asked by Verso Books to write about this series of images, and it was published in August 2020. And this was right towards the end of the uprisings that were occurring in our country. But still, and after New York City had experienced its most deadly time of COVID. So I had some time to reflect, and I'm going to highlight that a little bit because this work is still fresh on my mind. I'm still working with what I have produced. So it's really interesting to be able to talk about it right now, just a year ago, since I started this particular, thinking about this and working with this, and we started being at home all the time with my children, so it'll be interesting for me to be able to talk about this again in 5 years to see how much I've learned from what I've done. So I'm going to read to you like the beginning paragraph of this blog where I look at these pieces and I talk about them. The first 2 months of the pandemic were filled with the sound of ambulance sirens 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. At the beginning, I attempted to keep count of each siren I heard, but it simply got to be too many at a time, and I did not want to normalize any of it because the overall handling of the crisis had been abysmal. Another weekend, I stopped looking at the time. COVID broke what was familiar to me. Who I felt close to fractured from anything recognizable for some time to come. Aside from immediate family living with me, the only other human beings I would see were essential workers. I began to measure time based on my interactions with them. Morning meant receiving the mail from the postal person. Afternoon came to mean seeing construction workers from outside my window, warily walking off scaffolding. I could tell from a distance they were sick. Every step was extra cautious. If we were out of food, it meant a week had passed. I'd see the cashiers at the supermarket, scared shitless, and we'd look at each other, not knowing anymore how to say hello or how are you. These were all created at home, and the pieces are a bit of an oscillation between chronicling my life during the pandemic and the embodied research of inequity pertaining to BIPOC workers who have been largely the essential workers who have been sustaining this economy. This is the first one I took, and the title of each image includes the date that I took the image, and then a link, a hyperlink to an article connected to the essential worker depicted in the portrait. I won't click onto it because I want to save time. There's a lot more. This one I completed a couple of months ago, October 20th, 2020. Looking at the MTA workers, and it was funny because oftentimes when I walked my dog at night during March and April of 2020, there were no vehicles out on the road except for buses. And, you know, I would always kind of wave at a bus driver and they would honk back. And it was this moment of communication. It was really call and response. And I would really inevitably just cry right after that. So this is kind of in homage to our MTA workers. This one was fairly recent, December 3rd, 2020. And they're all taking place inside of a part of my home where I live. The costumes I picked and I put together with things that I have at home, and also some I have to order. Some things I do order, but I don't want to overcomplicate it and make it into like a Gregory Crewdson kind of portrait. Not so overproduced, but more within this element of, is it a snapshot? more playing with this quote unquote real and fiction. It's my kid's room. And then the series of images that have developed are also moments that we experienced as a country that our essential workers were also experiencing. So this in particular is when John Lewis passed away in July, and the essential work that he did, and thinking really deeply about the civil rights movement in July, right during the middle of Breonna Taylor and the verdict that was not guilty of the officers who killed her. I'm going to fast forward a little bit, not fast forward, but go back in time to 4 Aprils. And this is a quick video. I hope I have time. I have a timer on, Laura, and I know I'm behind. I'm just going to keep going, and then you'll just stop me. It's a quick video. Okay. It's a quick video I did for IGTV, and it culminates, it takes aspects of my research. A lot of my video is for performance. My performance is for video and photography. I do consider it performance art. I do live performance pieces, but by and large, I am very interested in these semiotic conditions and how our landscape as such has been informed through images, and how a lot of our reality is informed through images, photography, film, and now social media. So I do a lot of research in social media, a lot of interviews. I usually interview people in person, talk to them. But in quarantine, it's hard to do. And although we have Zooms and we have phone calls and we're, commenting on threads on social media, it's not the same as being in person or interviewing someone and getting a sense of them. But nonetheless, the work had to be produced, and 4 Aprils takes 4 different perspectives of 4 different people, but not people, just me at my home, working through and talking through what is occurring around us during the pandemic. And it is again a mishmash of interviews that I read, conversations that I had with people, and Facebook post of friends and things that we were sharing with one another. And it's a video collage.
I mean, this has been the usual. This has been a whole type of reformatting classrooms. And at the same time, I just get sick of people, talking about how to quiz someone on Blackboard. My partner gets tired of having people on the call, on a work call, try to talk about how to improve business tactics at this time. Like now is the time. But one thing that I do notice is that there are some apparent consequences of the switch to online teaching for public universities. Okay, not enough students have computers. I could have told you that. The chancellor has instituted a recalibration policy to try to get more students computers. So there are a number of students who have been called to the National Guard. We just had a whole whole brigade of National Guard troops coming in. So those are some of my students. Some dormitories are finding that once the students are home, they're not only in different time zones, but they become a subject of the chaos that's happening in their family's home. So not only are they having to share a computer and back up the Wi-Fi, but their parents are probably home if they're home working. If not, their parents are either unemployed or going in and out to work because there's no relief for working class or blue collar folks. There's just not, I'm
going to go back to the slideshow. And I'm going to take you now to Ohio. Please don't let it be too close. And this is a solo exhibition that was planned 2 years ago in 2018. And I was meant to be in Cleveland for over the summer in July 2020. with my family for 4 weeks, interviewing people and, getting to, understand the perspective in the Midwest in regards to the elections. But COVID happened and I couldn't do it. So I ended up doing everything virtually, having a virtual residency and interviewing people in the Midwest on their opinions on the election and about the election. So the clip that you're going to see starts off with, there's my timer. Starts off with, and it won't stop. Starts off with a reenactment, a second half of reenactment of one of the people that I interviewed. And it leads into a bit of a collage moment with Jacob Blake's father, and then some footage from various sources, including Democracy Now!
In Michigan in general, there's a lot. There's like a lot. It's a swing state. It went for Trump, and it was kind of like a weird fluke, right? Well, it was described as a weird fluke, but when you go to Michigan here, like, that's not that weird, actually. In Detroit, I will agree it is. I remember going to these marches and seeing protesters, and there were counter-protesters called the Blue Boys. And I think there might be some articles about them. I'm not sure, but you could probably find them. But they would show up with their AK-15s, dressed in Hawaiian shirts. I was like really in disbelief how fractured the city had become. And obviously, like, they were a terrorizing presence and threatening people. So I do think that it has become intensified because of, and they wouldn't be wearing masks. They wouldn't be respecting the rules that the protesters had set up. And they just didn't. They weren't willing to participate in the spirit of community. And it's one thing to sort of be like, I have an ideological stance. It's different. But I will recognize the spirit of community and like respect. But they were really not there to do that. They were there to antagonize and threaten in it. And, and that is, like it's visible signs. Like, I feel like wearing a mask and using a hand sanitizer, they're public displays of expression, saying, I care for my community. And it's not just an individualistic thing. And, it's like recognizing that part of it could mean I don't want to hurt anyone else,
Was a happy-go-lucky, smiling jokester. And he thought everything was funny. And I could hear him laughing as a kid, and as he got older, me and him had a special type of relationship. And it was almost like he was my best little friend at times. But knowing he was older, he's heading towards 30, as a father, your relationship changes with your children, because now they see the things that you went through as a 30-year-old parent. So they respect you in a different way. And you share moments with each other that are priceless. My father,
And the final piece I'll share with you, I think that it'll be a good segue into our conversation, is called Online. And it was a collaboration I did with an artist, Francesca Alcantara. And we're both performance artists. We're both Dominican, and we both worked and we both started this like mutual aid group in the North Bronx, the North Bronx Collective, with some other really incredible women. And a lot of our work has been thinking about what are we going to do after all this? How are we going to get or come back together? You know, how are we going to do things when we can't go back to the usual way of doing things? And this online consisted of a lot of play in order to consider how we'll come out on the other side. And it first aired in Artist Alliance on one of their IG curated IGTV curated exhibitions with artists, asking artists to reflect on their time during quarantine. The original video is 10 minutes, and I should have said that the original video of Please Don't Let It Be Too Close, which you just saw a clip of, that's 54 minutes. And For April's is about 8 minutes long. So I can't share them all with you at full length. So I apologize if it's a little bit staccato for you. But, you know, let's have a watch party. All right, so this is the last part of the closing scene of Online. And the whole premise is that Francesca and I are walking towards each other. Francesca's flying a red kite, and I'm tying red string, red yarn, all the way from where I live to this baseball field area that we met. So all along the way, I'm threading trees, I'm threading like fences and everything. And Francesca is flying her kite from a very densely, if you haven't been to the Bronx, very densely populated area, obviously, but also has a lot of buildings, mostly in our area, thank goodness, 6 feet high, but you know, with developers and their greed, they're getting higher. So we're trying doing these things that we're used to doing, but how are we going to do them together? How are we going to reinvent the way that we do things, considering the constraints that we are under? And I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And the music that was created was created by another mutual aid worker, Bonnie Cannon, who's a professor at CUNY as well. That's it.
Thanks so much, Alicia.
You're welcome.
It's just so wonderful to see all of your work together, even if it's small bits of it. I think it's great to get a little taste. And, you know, you and I have known each other a while. We've had numerous deep conversations, and also not so deep ones. But I think, you know, what is remarkable to me about your work and your life, because they are not separate, is that they're not separate, and that each flows so generously one to the other. And I think, you know, in that sense, you know, looking at what COVID has wrought, what I should say, not just COVID, like what the last year has wrought, because I think somehow COVID has become shorthand for all of the things we've lived through in 2020, and that continue to kind of influence the way that we see the world right now. And I guess, you know, some of your work is reflective of, you know, rage and sorrow and deep mourning, but it also preserves space for humor, for silliness, for play, for acknowledging our humanity, and the need and the whole panoply of needs that we all have, right? And I love the way that it mashes up, particularly in these works, because you know, we've all been through a lot, right? And so I just wondered if we could talk maybe a little bit about how, you know, I think there's a bigger recognition, or at least greater attention being paid to all the undoing and redoing that needs to be done, all the unlearning and relearning that needs to be done, all of the unmaking and remaking that needs to be done. And I guess I'm seeing that in this body of work in particular. And I wondered if you could talk about that, and how those, first of all, how you dealt through this body of work with your conditions, and also like, how do we deal you know, in communion with one another, but also as, you know, individual people, like how does art interact with that? And particularly with the like intensity of the social disruption, because I feel like in a lot of what you address in the work, especially reflecting back stories that, you know, people have told you, or, you know, the kind of look of the scared shitless supermarket checkout person, you know, it's like all of our social interactions, you know, the kind of default things, right, are disrupted. And so, you know, that's both weird and uncomfortable, but also maybe create space to remake those, because there are highly problematic aspects of those, you know, kind of coded social interactions, you know, or you interacting with the bus driver every day, you know, in this kind of moment of solidarity and just kind of recognition, like, I see you, you know. So maybe talk about the kind of disruption of social connection, like what that means, what it could mean, and just this kind of question of like, how to deal, like what does dealing for you look like through your work right now?
Thanks for your question, Laura. I think that I've dealt with my work how I usually have dealt with it, and it's coming from, and I will quote Bell Hooks, because she's been an incredible, it's incredible just to reread her work. And there's a little quote, right? This is just a few words, but layered. The perspective from which we approach art is overdetermined by location. And I want to de-emphasize the over-determined, but really emphasize the location. Because location for me has been a way of working through relationships and a way for me to deconstruct location in itself. So performance artists we often deal with space and time. You know, it's like how Lorraine O'Grady, in one of her brilliant essays, and I can't wait to see her show, talks about space and time being the elements that performance artists work with, and particularly during live events. And I find that space and time, I love dealing with those concepts, and they're also very metaphysical at times, particularly in the live performance. For me, dealing with location, why are you at this again? I stopped you, I'm sorry, it's my timer. And then particularly with me, I look at location because I wanna feel myself, before I go on to any other levels of space and time, which are so non-linear, I want to make sure that I've grounded myself within the space, within the location, because it also can be very abstract. It's not so hard material when we think about location, if we really break it down. But work with the parameters that have been provided or that I've chosen to deconstruct and take apart in order to work through difficult times like this. And rework the image in order to take advantage of the moment, to deconstruct and to really talk back at all the different elements that have shaped our modern world and the way that we deal with each other. There are many players in that regard. That's one
Well, and
way
I think that's particularly interesting that you chose this quote having to do with location, because I think about it in your work as physical location, of course, and like the materiality of what that physical location is, that very real aspect of, am I in Cleveland? Am I in the Bronx? Where am I? But it's also like, I feel like about positionality and like where one is. In terms of not only life experience, but also what side of the lens, what side, you know, on which register of read-inness to whatever the conversation is happening around. And I think that's something that's very particularly resonant for me, because I think, you know, our own positionality on a very personal level, but also as, you know, people living in community, you know, is highly relevant to this moment. You know, it's like recognizing, you know, each of our suffering, but also our fortune, you know, and our, I don't know, I just, there's something about like how you're talking about location that to me speaks also to positionality, to like where you operate from and with and towards. And I think that that's important because of where for you, art and your art and activism kind of meld into one another in some really important ways. And so maybe you can talk a little bit about how that relationship works in relation to location, in relation to who you are, who the people are, who you talk, or who talk through, to speak through you, you know? I'm curious about that.
Are you curious about how my activism ends up in my work, or how it all just sort of happens?
How it happens and how it feeds, how one feeds the other. Because I see them as very symbiotic for you. Like I see it every time I look at your work, and because I know what you do also, you know, in the other planes. And so I see it. And I just want to kind of delve into like what goes on for you in your mind as you're like having those lived experiences in one realm or the other, and like how they meld for you.
I mean, they meld because they're coming from the same person. And you know, we've talked about this, like, yeah, I'm a parent and I can't divorce that from my artwork. I would find it insincere of me to create work that wasn't reflective of what was going on around me, or at least attempting to dissect what was going on around me, in order to create this praxis of becoming more human, right? How do we become more human beings? And that's Grace Lee Boggs, right? How do we do that? And what tools can we use in order to do that? And arts, it's such an intricate part in this freedom struggle that we're having as a society at large. So I'm not the only one on the planet experiencing that. And there is a need to communicate to others. It's almost like ET, where you're sending out that signal, and you want to know that there are other people that are following this train of thought, experiencing what you're seeing what you're experiencing, and maybe for whatever reason they're doing it in their own manner, and working through it in their own manner, but maybe not in the public realm. And for me, I have to do it in the public realm because there's a need in me that needs to communicate these ideas, to make sense of them, to sort them out. Perhaps it is to create a map of this location that we're in, to create this archive and this story in order to look back on and reflect, because we have to really know where we have been. We're not going to figure out the future, and if we haven't figured that out, and then figure out how we're going to deal with that now. So all these different aspects of if it's not my organizing work, or if it's not like direct cultural organizing work that I've done, and my artwork or my teaching, they all at some moment have to intersect. I think it'll be, I mean, it's the word quantum physics is popping into my mind. I mean, inevitably they'll have to come together because of they're constantly they feed off one another.
Yeah, they speak to one another, and they augment one another. I mean, I see that in the work, and you know, I think that, you know, this is partially this kind of processing that you're talking about doing through making the work of all the other stuff, right? And partially the processing of the interviews that you do, and the kind of reenacting or enacting, of course, with permission from those people, having their voices speak through you, and this kind of, I don't know, I'll just call it like performance of the real, like a performing of the real, maybe. I don't know if those are the right words, but you know, there's, and I don't mean it like you're faking it. I mean it like there's a very real thing that you're communicating about what somebody else is going through, right? And you're trying to, you're processing what you've heard at the same time that you're making it accessible to other people. And I think Michael Friedman had a question that came up in the Q&A, which I think we can address kind of in this conversation, because, and Michael asks, so as an African-American artist, how do you deal with your emotions in your artwork towards the climate that we're in? Me as African-American, I'm angry, but it shows in my work. And I mean, as a viewer of your work, I often feel your anger, or the anger of the person whose words you're channeling. And I think that that's part of the power of it. And I wonder just how you think about that shape shifting that you're doing, because it's very clear in some of the pieces that you're yourself, you know, you're yourself, and you're also in your house. I mean, in these particular ones, but, you know, you've made a lot of work in your house, in your neighborhood, you know, where things are like slightly veiled, but not completely. And so I think that there's sort of that intentional, intentional reveal to make it look, to make it clear that you are enacting the words of somebody else, but through your own lens, you know?
No, for sure.
So, yeah.
I think that I mean, performance complicates our understanding of cultural practice. And that's something that's fascinating me. And it's funny when you mentioned the shape shifting. I started off as an actor, so my first medium, my first tool is going to be my body, and how I embody what I'm seeing and play it out to make sense of it, to be able to respond to what I'm seeing and work through it. Like some of us will, if we're working through a math problem, we're going to particularly write out a plethora of different formulas and to work out X, Y, and Z and what equals. And I have to use my body to work it out. And away from the theatrical apparatus, like away from playwrights and directors and I'm not good with, I don't want to deal with that. I want to be able to work it out through my own way. And then also I'm a photographer. So I work through it, looking at what has housed it, what has been one of the primary products of this modern way of being. And we deal with and we work through issues in our society. It is through images that we work, until that changes, until there's no more access to image making or image viewing. And what I mean by image, I mean the quote unquote realistic images that we are accustomed to seeing on what is TV, our screens, our phones. Those are the ones that we engage with the most, the ones that we grapple with these larger existential questions with. It's with those, whether we're conscious of it or not. And they're also primarily the reason, they're also the primary ones, the original photographic image, the ones that started shaping how we relate to one another, because someone needed to have power. So how am I able to use my body, knowing that I can control my body, because I don't want it to be controlled by someone else or someone to control my image, to talk back to this, to undo the way that we have been relating to each other, in a way that positions us differently. Because now, right now.
You go ahead.
No, really go ahead.
I was just going to say, you're talking about a liberatory practice, right? Like you're talking about being liberated from the images or the uses of your body that would be imposed upon you. Were you not claiming them? And using your own body to materialize your reality or your whatever you desire. I mean,
or an interpretation of it, right?
Or an interpretation of it, right?
Or just like, or working through.
It's not about veracity. I don't mean that. It's not about it being like true or real. I think that it's something else.
Yeah, and it's not a mimicking. I mean, I feed off a lot of, and a lot of my graduate work, this is where I started down the path, like reading more about ethnography, and the study, how can another human being study another human being, but then claim not only ownership, but the best interpretation of what they were seeing, when that other person was probably hiding most of what, of their communication for a various reason, but mostly protective, and they're not having any access to what was being interpreted. That idea always fascinated me throughout graduate school and started me on my using the self-portrait more, and using myself. I could do these things with actors. I could do this with other people, but for me, it goes back to that moment, to my own realization of looking at the setup of ethnography and photography, looking at that setup and wondering, well, what if that other person just turned around and said no, or turned around and most often was just acting or performing what they wanted to see. or what the viewer wanted to see, it being manipulated. But and I started down a path of like, well, like how much do I want to manipulate, and how much do I not want to manipulate? Because some of the viewers may be people like me wanting to undo. So then how do I set up a stream of communication that is for those wanting to undo and wanting to deconstruct this, in order to make this new way of communicating that it's not about power over the other.
Yeah.
It is about communicating a human experience and a moment. And that is what art allows us to do. It allows us to be able to deconstruct these things and make sense of it, because the real pleasures of it is our life. Life itself is the biggest pleasure, and we often lose sight of it, because, you know, our construct of time, going back to Lorraine O'Grady, right? That construct is right now dictated through 9 to 5, 10 to 6, go to school, graduate, pay bills, retire. That is our construct of time. And I think that contrast, that structure itself that we've been living under is breaking down, and that's something that climate chaos is really shaking us into understanding, or not.
Right, as we decide whether or not we're going to pay attention to that, right? There are some of us who don't pay attention at all and don't care. So just before, it's already like the time is just
flown.
There's one more question from Rafael Damast, who I just thought I would bring that up, just you know, to see if you had a kind of gut answer, because it's kind of an interesting one. Rafael asks, I wonder what you think about the role of memorials and monuments at this time. What would Grullón want to see?
I mean, you know, I've had the great pleasure of working with a lot of artists and collective groups that have done a lot of work around memorials and monuments, and bringing up the point of changing them and bringing them down. I mean, I think in the word memorial is memory. It's a collective memory. And then that collective memory also affects the individual personal memory. But what happens when that is being projected is false or exclusive to maintaining power over? And then it becomes a problem to have that up. So if we're creating memorials, and what are we memorializing? How can a community, and what I mean by community specifically are those communities often not depicted in these larger scale objects that are intrusive to our psychic space and to our living space. What would it look like if those collective memories were enacted to reshape the environments that we're currently living in?
Yeah.
How can we recreate? I mean, it's all about recreating our spaces. So if we're going to recreate our spaces, then what's not working has to go.
Yeah. And what is perceived as neutral history or neutral collective memory has to be revealed for the biases that it contains. And that is really, to me, fundamental in this question of the memorials and monuments thing, because, you know, I think that so many people learn history in a non-critical sense, and it's just digested.
Or through Hollywood.
Yeah, or through Hollywood, or through, as you say, like, all of the images that we receive every single day, whether it's a fashion magazine, or the, evening news. So these realities that are fed by people in power, people of wealth, in order to maintain their position. And that is something that's really powerful. And these images are exactly why those notions of neutrality have to be undone because they don't exist. This is why I wrote my book. So, it's kind of something I care a lot about. But, before you can even think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, whatever people mean by those phrases, you've got to acknowledge that we enter from positions of extreme bias based on our positionality in society, our educational backgrounds, all kinds of factors that make us who we are. And that's why diverse groups of people are important to talk together.
Absolutely.
To say the least. I mean, just tip of the iceberg. Alicia, is there anything else that you want to add before we kind of close it? I feel like it's 7:03. I know
it's
people
just flown by.
People have been Zooming all day. I don't want to go too far over, but if there's anything that you want to add, please.
I think other than an overwhelming gratitude, a feeling of gratitude for everyone who put this together, and for you, Laura, for engaging me in this quick conversation about my work, there is nothing else but just a grand thank you to everyone who's come tonight, and hopefully I could do this again at another time and venture and point in space.
Yes. Well, that is for sure.
That would be fantastic, Alicia, to have you back, and just want to give great big thanks to Laura and Alicia for your time and for your for your efforts to really cut into the depth of this moment and the questions that are facing all of us as we work through this moment. So thank you for your serious contributions to that work. So I just want to thank everybody for attending. Thank you, Patty Phillips, for your warm welcome, and Chuck for your technical support. And I just want to encourage also everyone to keep in touch. The galleries at Moore have an event on March 2nd with the Creative Resilience Collective, which is really on, building on a lot of themes that Alicia and Laura brought up, as far as collective care work. And we're going to be developing some more projects here at Moore over the course of the coming months through a collaborative project called Care Crisis. So if that's something you want to get in touch about or learn more about other activities or programs happening at Moore, feel free to get in touch with me, Daniel Tucker, dtucker@moore.edu. But please, let's just send a warm thank you again to our speakers, Alicia and Laura. Thanks so much for your time and your work. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you
Good
all.
evening.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.